All right. Well, I'm going to get things rolling tonight. The faster we get started, I guess the faster we get finished. So why wait? Welcome to week 11. Believe it or not, we only have 4 more weeks after this one until the course is done. Um, Most of the work between now and the end of the course is going to be sort of starting to put things together, starting to wrap up, do final assembly on projects, start to synthesize some of the work that we've been doing together into some practical projects and so on. So we're kind of starting the final phase of the course over the next couple of weeks and into the final stretch. So basically tonight, as I said, I'm gonna basically use tonight just to go over the scope of the work for the next 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks are sort of basically connected to each other. The syllabus lists actually 3 weeks worth of production mini project work. Because I inserted the week into the middle of the course to do some catch up and touching base with people. What I am going to do is basically cut out one of those 3 production mini project weeks. So the 3 will become 2. So there will be a mini project assignment for this week and then one for next week. The assignments themselves are basically going to be the same. The only thing that's going to differ between the two is just the focus, sort of the specifics of what types of materials you're looking to put together. But the core of the assignment in terms of what you're creating is going to be the same this week and next week. So I figure I can kind of go over the whole thing this week. There will not be a WebEx meeting next week, partly because it's just going to be a continuation of this week, and also partly because I'm going to be in final dress rehearsals for a production next Tuesday night. So I am not going to be available. So it actually lined up pretty well with the syllabus and the work. But before I get any further, I always like to throw out an option or an opportunity at the beginning of the class here. If anyone has questions. I know it's been a couple of weeks of mainly focusing on assessment, getting somebody to look at your instructional design plans, get some outside feedback, come up with an assessment plan for your students within your instructional design, get the phase 3 assignment put together and submitted. So there's been a fair amount of work over the last few weeks, and if anybody has questions or things that they would like to address right now, please feel free to just chime in. The resounding sound of silence. It's all right. It's all good. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of that, and also by way of looking forward, in terms of the instructional design projects, um, we've completed 3 phases. There is one more phase to kind of work on individually, and that's going to come out of the work for the next couple of weeks. And that's going to be about incorporating some actual examples of instructional materials for the instructional design plan. Not everything. I'm not going to be asking you to create every handout and video and web resource and everything, but you're going to be at least gathering a few representative examples of materials, and those will get folded into the document. And then after that, it's just the final assembly. And the way that I've structured this project over the years seems to work pretty well, which is that by the time you've completed phase 4, essentially your final project document is done. It just needs to be put together. So the final project that you will submit at the end of the course will basically be a synthesis of all 4 of the phases that you will have already completed at that point. So honestly, a lot of people start by just doing a big cut and paste, bringing all of their 4-phase documents into one master document. And then it's usually just a matter of going through it and kind of cleaning it up, unifying the language, adjusting some things here and there if you've made changes along the way. But my hope is that you're getting to the last couple weeks of the course, not feeling like you have to suddenly create this major final project, but that essentially the project has already been created and all you're having to do is edit and finalize. So that's, again, with 4 or 5 weeks left here, that's kind of the big picture looking ahead for those instructional design projects. So the work of the next couple of weeks will lead you towards that phase 4. And then after that, you'll have the final 2 or 3 weeks to just bring everything together into your final design document. So that's that side of things. So what is the next 2 weeks of work? It is all about materials. We have already talked about materials earlier in the course from sort of a theoretical standpoint. If you go back a few weeks in the course in Blackboard, we talked about the difference between materials and tools. We talked about the different kind of types of materials that there are, sort of categories of types. We talked about some uh, guidelines for how to assess instructional materials and kind of get a sense of whether they're going to be effective or not. So the next couple weeks are going to be about just having a chance to actually put that information to use and to take some scenarios. The scenarios will consist of a type of learning, so teaching a fact, teaching a concept, teaching a psychomotor skill, and pairing those up with different types of instructional materials, graphics, text materials, videos, things like that. And just for each scenario, looking for an example of an instructional material that you think would work well in that particular situation. The goal is not necessarily to have you create the materials. You certainly may if you wish, but there are other courses within this program that are focused more on actually learning how to use various tools to create things. So there is a video class, there is a graphics class. So like that stuff is covered in much more detail elsewhere. So for this, it's totally okay to go out and find a resource that already exists and just analyze it. And if it looks like it's going to fit your need, then just bring that into your mini project. So that I'm just kind of setting that stage, that this is more about analyzing and selecting and not so much about testing how well you can create things or use software to create materials. So before I go any further, as I like to do, I'm just going to bop over here to Blackboard and just have that on the screen while I talk. All of this is posted. It's all there. So everything that you need should be available. So in terms of the overview, basically what I just said, these next 2 weeks are going to work together as a unit. So everything you do this week will basically have a carbon copy next week. The only thing that will change will be the type of learning in the scenarios and the type of instructional material that you're looking for. But there will be 3 scenarios this week. There will be 3 scenarios next week. And they will be the write-up will be submitted as 2 separate documents for those 2 weeks. So let's look kind of at the specifics of that in terms of the steps and in terms of the scenarios and so on. So as I said, we're heading into the final stretch. These final activities are going to be more about synthesizing things that we've already talked about as opposed to necessarily new learning. So to start with, in this week's Blackboard, I did provide a very quick recap of what we talked about earlier on a few weeks ago in terms of selecting materials. And it boiled down to, or there were sort of these three main questions to ask yourself when you're looking at an instructional material of some type. Is it appropriate? Which means not just appropriate for your students. I mean, usually when we say appropriate, we're thinking, is it the right age level? Is it the right, population, whatever. But appropriate also means that, is it aligned to your goals? So in every case, whether you're going to be working with one of my scenarios or one from your instructional design plan, look at the goal that you're trying to come out of the lesson with, and make sure that you are aligning the materials with that goal. If the material involves a lot of information about something that has no relationship to the goal, then it's probably not the best aligned or appropriate material for that situation. Engaging, obviously, we want these things to be things that your students are going to want to interact with. Some of that comes out of design, and there's going to be some information this week, some readings about the focus this week is going to be on graphic things, so text-based materials and graphic-based materials. So what can you do if it's just a text handout? What can you do with the layout to make it engaging for a student, so it's not just a bunch of text sitting on a page? If it's a graphic, what sorts of things do you want to do in terms of, or look for in terms of, how the graphic is organized, so that it will engage the users and really draw them into the learning experience? And then the final one is accessible. And again, this also gets back to the design aspect. But you want to make sure that every student that is going to be a part of this program or be impacted by your instructional design, that these materials will work for all of them. Um, just this past week, my school district, we had two big in-service sessions that were all about universal design for learning, or UDL. And that is all about this concept of, rather than designing a lesson and then having to create separate modifications for individual students, you design a lesson from the ground up so that it can be accessed equally by all students. So if you're picking materials, you want to make sure that the way the material is put together, that it's not going to create any roadblocks for any students that may be needing to access those materials and use those materials. So it's three quick words: appropriate, engaging, and accessible. But there's a lot of ground that's covered by those three. So the big piece of the work for the next 2 weeks is, basically, you're going to need to explain or justify why you picked this particular thing based on this framework of these three things. So you can kind of use these three as the outline of your write-up. This material is appropriate because it blah 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 blah. It's going to engage the students because it does this or does that or whatever. So that's going to be sort of our main measuring stick as you select materials. Then also, going back even further into work that we did in this program, going back to learning types, when you were working on phase 2. And for this week, we're going to just look at 3 of the types of learning: declarative knowledge, or teaching of facts, which are just the verbatim recall types of activities, vocabulary words, things like that. Concepts, which, again, concepts are those containers for ways to organize things into groups. So a lot of that is about learning what the characteristics are of a concept, so that students know whether to put something in that container or not. And then principles, which principles are sort of learning the rules of something, the if-then types of things. So if we heat a gas, then it expands. That would be an example of a principle that's being taught. So we're going to take materials, our understanding of what makes good, effective materials. We're going to take our understanding of different types of learning and what those different types of learning mean for instruction. And then sort of the only new-ish thing is just to take a little bit of a closer look at some of the guidelines specifically related to the types of materials we're going to look at this week, which, as I said, in this case is text based materials and graphics based materials. And I know there's a lot of overlap in those. Sometimes it's hard to find a true text based material that really only contains text. But, do your best. And then graphics based, which, anything that is a diagram, a drawing, an illustration, something along those lines. But again, a lot of graphics contain text as well. So these aren't necessarily completely exclusive categories, but you'll be looking for something that is mainly text-based and something that is mainly graphics-based. So there are two readings to go through here. One is a pretty lengthy article about text and organizing text. There's a lot more to think about than a lot of people realize. People create a handout and they just sort of type everything up and go, okay, that looks good. Check spelling, good, good. But there's a lot more that can be done in terms of organizing text on a page to make it more effective. And then same thing with graphics. And the topic on the graphics side of things is going to be something called the Gestalt principles. A couple of you in this class probably have already had that with me in another class. But basically, they're a series of guidelines or rules that we have learned or discovered about the way that we as humans process visual imagery. And if you know how humans process an image, you can take advantage of that and help to make instructional materials more effective by either organizing things in a way to make them stronger or by making sure to stay away from doing things certain ways that can make a graphic more confusing. So for both of these, it's just a matter of kind of going through and familiarizing yourself with some of the guidelines. Certainly, especially with the text-based one, the article is, like I said, a little on the lengthy side. Don't feel like you have to hit every single point in that article in order for something to work. As long as it doesn't have any major issues and try, at least attempts to address a number of the things on text, then that's fine. And same thing with the Gestalt principles. You'd be hard pressed to find a graphic that truly represents and uses every single Gestalt principle equally and equally as well. So it's more guidelines than laws. So once we have all three of those, understanding of material selection, understanding of learning types, understanding of these specific types of learning materials, then the actual assignment is just to put that together. So as I said, this week and next week we'll have 3 scenarios. In each case, I am giving a scenario, but what I'm asking you to do is, if any of these scenarios apply to your instructional designs, meaning like the first one here is for facts, and the type of material is a text-based material. So if in your instructional design, you have somewhere where you are planning to use some kind of a handout or text-based thing to teach a fact, then you can replace this scenario with the one from your instructional design. You're going to need to include examples of materials with your final instructional design plan anyway. So this would be a chance to get that work done rather than doing it separately later. So hopefully that's explained well enough. So everybody's going to do a fact scenario, a concept scenario, and a principles scenario this week. If you don't have an example in your instructional design that pairs that learning type with that material type, then use the scenario I've given. But if you do find a match, then use the scenario from your project. And then that way you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. do the mini project, and then already have the material selected or created that you can then incorporate into your instructional design plan. Um, and again, there's more instructions here, but same thing. So you're not expected to create the materials yourself, although you can. I'm not going to stop you if you have something very specific and you've maybe already got something that you could modify or tweak or just brush up on. Feel free to use things that you've already created. You might go back and analyze something you've created before and realize that there's some things you can do to tweak it to make it a little better. So that's fine, but it is also perfectly okay for you to find a resource that already exists. Obviously, credit it if it's something, a resource you're pulling from online or from a textbook or something like that. Just credit where you got it from. But what you're going to be more involved with is then taking that material and doing a write up about it, about why you chose it. Out of all the options out there, why did this one look like it was going to be a particularly effective one for you? Um, the other thing, and I think I put this in here as well, if you get stuck and you can't find something that you think is a high quality instructional material for a scenario, then it's okay to pick one that's flawed. Just make sure in your write up that you let me know that it's flawed and talk about how you would improve it if you were to actually incorporate it into your plan or into the scenario. That's fine too. I tried to develop scenarios that cover a range of topics and a range of grade levels and so on, but I know some of them may be a little trickier to locate materials on. So if you find something, even if you don't think it's perfect, feel free to use it, as long as you then include in your write up about sort of what you would do to bring it up to snuff. So the three specific scenarios for this week for facts, I give you the goal. So basically in SMART goal format. So this one happens to be from a 10th grade English class. By the end of this unit segment, students will be able to define and identify the 5 common types of poetic feat. Um, don't worry too much if you don't know what poetic feat are. You can look it up really quick. It's more about finding some text-based material, and that can be online, right? The tool is separate from the material. So it could be a web page that is mainly text, or it could be a physical text document or something. But you're going to look for something that's primarily text-based that helps to address the 5 types of poetic feat: iambic, trochaic, dactylic, anapestic, and spondaic. So that's scenario 1, just simple fact, teach the recall, the vocabulary. Scenario 2 is a concept, and it has to do, this would be from a 7th grade science class, some kind of graphic-based material that would support students learning the concept of work as it's used in physics applications. So work is force and displacement. It's basically energy put into something in order to do something, to get something to move or to do something. So it's looking for a graphic. This could be an image. It could be a diagram, something along those lines that is graphics based that would support this goal. And then the final one is a principle, and this one is from a PE class, and it has to do with the principle of progression in physical training or activity, which is basically, in a nutshell, just how you need to sort of increase the rigor of an exercise in order for it to continue to be effective. Um, and in this case, you get to choose whether you want to do this through a text-based material or a graphics-based material, or maybe this would be one where you find one that's kind of a blend of the two. That's fine as well. Um, so those are the 3 given scenarios for this week. So like I said, if you don't have a fit in your instructional designs for a fact with a text-based material, a concept with a graphic-based material, or a principle with a text or graphics-based material, um, if you have an example of that in your instructional designs, then feel free to ignore the goal and the setting here, replace it with your own instructional design goal and setting, and then locate the material that you would incorporate. And then you would just put that in. You don't even necessarily have to explain it. I will obviously know when I get your document, if I look at the scenarios and you're not doing this, then I'll know that it's coming from your instructional design plans. So this page is basically all of the background things, the 3 areas to synthesize, and then the actual scenarios themselves. Just in the interest of trying to make the page not super long, I did split out then a second smaller page that's more just about the nitty gritty of the layout of the actual assignment, the document. Um, so it's going to be a 3-section document. So each section is going to focus on one of the 3 scenarios. Start in each section by just summarizing the goal, the scenario. I mean, that should be like a sentence or 2 max. Especially if you're replacing it with one from your instructional design, make sure you clearly state the goal and the setting for whichever one you're working with. And then, each section is just going to be a paragraph or 2. I'm not looking for pages of support for these. So when you've found a material that you think is appropriate, then a paragraph or 2 where you address those issues of, is it engaging? Is it appropriate? Is it aligned? Those sorts of things. Talk about the material and why you thought this was such a good example. Or, like I said, if you're going with an example that you know is flawed, then talk about how it's flawed and what you would do to improve it. And again, I've put this everywhere. These can be existing materials, is totally fine. If you create the materials, you can do that as well. I'm okay with that, but obviously that's a little more work, but that's entirely up to you. Yeah, and in terms of the write-up here, those 3 things: appropriate, engaging, accessible, and also the design issues. So you want to look at it from the standpoint of those 3 selection criteria, but then also once you've gone through the readings on the text and the graphics principles, include some reflection on that too. Like, this is a really good graphic because it makes use of the following Gestalt principles of design, or something along those lines. If you have suggestions for improvements, you can include those too. And this is probably going to be, in some cases, the trickiest thing, is obviously to include an example of the material. And that's going to vary widely depending on what it is you found. If it's a web page, you can include a link to the web page. You could take a screen capture of the web page, or sometimes you can print a web page as a PDF. If it's, a handout that you have in physical form, you could take a photo or scan the handout and then include that into the document. So it's really going to depend on what you find for the material, but some way or another, I want to be able to see the materials that you've chosen. So if it's a link, give me the link. You can put the link right in your document. If it's something that you need to take as an image and include it in your document, you can do that. If worse comes to worse and it's something that you just can't get to fit into your document you're submitting, you can just submit it as an additional attachment to the assignment. Just make sure that you clearly identify, if you're going to do that, who it's coming from and like which scenario it's a part of, just so that if I download these things, I know which things belong with which assignments. So you might need a little creativity there in terms of how to include the examples of the actual materials once you've found them. When the project's all done, just like we've done with our other phases, there's an assignment upload page. Please continue to submit everything as a PDF. Most of you have been really good about being able to do that, so shouldn't be an issue at this point. I have a naming convention for this: last name, first initial, MP1 for mini project 1. Make sure your name is in the document. put section headers for the 3 scenarios. Like that's basically what this document is. So just put a section header for scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, just so I can find them quickly in your documents. And then those will get uploaded to the assignment page that's here. So that, believe it or not, that is basically the scope of this week. Like I said, these next 2 weeks are about synthesizing learning type knowledge with materials knowledge, with a little bit of new knowledge about some design principles, and connecting them to your ID plans as much as possible. So we're kind of synthesizing 4 different areas that we've talked about. And then once we get through these 2 weeks, the final few weeks are going to be about putting together that phase 4, which a lot of that is going to be coming out of the work of the next 2 weeks because it's going to be all about materials. And then the final synthesis activity is pulling together all the phases of your instructional design plan and creating the final master document for that. So we really are in some ways heading into the final stretch here. There's not really a lot of new things I'm going to be throwing at you. It's going to be more about pulling together the work from the last 10 weeks. Can't believe it's been that long already. All right, so that is the scope of this week and next week. Like I said, no class meeting next week. Next week's Blackboard will actually look very similar to this week's. I include all of the instructions again. I know that's redundant, but I found it's a lot easier than asking students to refer back to this week. I just put all of the instructions in again with the new scenarios, a new project upload link, and so on. So it's going to look very similar. I'll probably even roll it out ahead of next Tuesday. I might roll it out next weekend. So if any of you want to just keep going on these and kind of get them all done, because they are similar, I'll try to get this week 12 posted as early as I can. And that's pretty much that. So questions, concerns, anything I can clarify?
Hi, Professor. I was just wondering if I don't already have something in my instructional design plan that aligns with the scenarios, can I adapt to make it align with the scenarios so that it's, like you said, killing 2 birds with 1 stone?
So you mean like you say you have a fact you want to teach, but you weren't planning on doing the fact with a
Text-based.
text-based material?
Right.
Um, yeah, I think I'm more interested, I think, of the 2 things, more interested in the type of material than the type of learning, if that makes sense. So if you have a fact, but you're planning on doing it through a different type of material, then I would do it when that type of material comes around,
Got it.
if that makes sense. So rather than doing a fact with a different kind of material, do the right kind of material, but replace the type of learning with the fact.
Okay.
Essentially, this week it's going to be these. Then next week it's mainly multimedia types of things. So audio, video, animation types of resources. We're not going to cover every type of instructional material. So there may be some that types of materials you're planning on using we may not cover in these 2 weeks. But yeah, if you can find a fit, like I said, I guess I'm more interested in having you analyze different types of materials than analyze different types of learning types, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yep, I
So,
understand.
yeah, but yeah, adapt them as needed. I want them to be useful. So,
Thank you.
yep. Any other questions for the good of the order? All right. Well, if that's the case, I'm not going to keep you any longer than we need to. Um, I did say, or I meant to say, I think I put it in the overview for this week. I know I'm behind on getting feedback on phase twos. I'm going to try to get through those over the next week. I am in tech for this show, but I'm going to have some free time where I can kind of chip away at those. So I'd like to get those back, at least some basic feedback back to you on phase two, so that then I can also get phase three within the next couple of weeks. Because as we head into the final synthesis of those ID plans, I want to make sure that you've gotten feedback from me just so that you know that you're on the right track with everything and if there's any suggestions I have. So I will be doing my best to get caught up on all of that. And I appreciate your patience on me getting that feedback back to you. So, all right, that's the final word for tonight. I will remain online until everyone's logged out. So if you've got any other questions you want to hang out and ask me, feel free. If not, enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy the rest of your week. And I would see any of you that want to be back online in 2 weeks. So thank you all and have a good night.